Order. Order. I call the Standing Committee on Community Services to order. This is the Standing Committee on Community Services. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral land of the Mi'kmaq people. I'm Melissa Sheehy-Richard, and I'm the chair of this I'm the MLA for Hants West, and also I'm the chair of this committee. Today, we will hear from presenters regarding access to midwifery and efforts towards reconciliation. I just remind you to make sure your phones are on silent at this time. And in case of emergency, we'll use the exits, Granville Street exit, and walk up to Grand Parade. I would now like to ask the committee members to introduce themselves, and we will begin with MLA White.
Hello, good morning. I'm John White. I'm the MLA for Glace-Bain Dominion.
Good morning, Larry Harrison, MLA for Colchester Muscat Albert Valley.
Good morning, Danielle Barkos, MLA for Chester St.
Good morning, Dave Ritzy, MLA for Truro Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Good morning, Susan LeBlanc, MLA for Dartmouth North.
Good morning and welcome. Kendra Coombs, MLA for Cape Breton Center, Whitney Pier.
Good morning, I'm Braden Clark. I'm the MLA for Bedford South. Hurry up.
He's Brendan McGuire.
Hey, I'm Brendan McGuire, MLA for Halifax Atlantic.
Welcome, and I just want to let you know that there is construction, so hopefully we'll be able to hear through the committee, and there are earpieces beside your mics if you do require them. I'd like to also welcome the witnesses here today, and I would like them to ask if they can introduce themselves first, and then we'll do our opening remarks after everyone has introduced themselves. We'll begin with Ms. Pictou.
My name is Karen Pictou. I'm from Millbrook First Nation. I'm the Executive Director of Nova Scotia Native Women's Association, and thank you for having me.
Good morning, I'm Lindsay Peach. I'm the Executive Director with Tajikeimɨk.
Good morning, I'm Jessica MacDonald. I'm a registered midwife and president of the Association of Nova Scotia Midwives.
Tanya Penney, Senior Executive Director of the Clinical Portfolio within the Department of Health and Wellness.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Nancy Cashen. I'm the Director of Interprofessional Practice and Learning at IWK Health.
And I would like now to begin with opening remarks. And Ms. Pictou, did you want to begin? Okay.
So to begin, I want to acknowledge that Mi'kmaq babies have been born in Mi'kmaq communities since time immemorial until 1970. And at that time, it also correlates with the time of the closing of the Shubenacadie Indian Residential School. And that replacement of Mi'kmaq traditional practices and ways and knowledge were replaced with patriarchy and colonialism. All of this change has impacted Mi'kmaq communities in a variety of ways, but it continues to keep Mi'kmaq families unsafe and in situations that can lead to forced and coerced sterilization and other impacts like children being taken away. So a number of years ago, the province and the Mi'kmaq have been working towards how to end the birth alert system. Sorry, I'm terrible about not looking at my notes. And in that work, Minister Regan was very, very adamant that she wanted to end the birth alert system. But how could she, and what would it be replaced with? So during that time, the Mi'kmaq came together and we discussed that with our provincial partners and everyone else that had some sort of stake in decolonizing birthing and indigenizing the ways that Mi'kmaq people can give birth in Nova Scotia. And during that time, it was discussed, and midwifery was that answer of what birth alerts would be replaced with, because it provides a continuum of care during the whole pregnancy and postnatal. And it supports families so that we can put wraparound services in place right at the very beginning and, continue those services. And after after that postnatal care will also be important. And I'm glad that our MLA here for Millbrook is here, because he really supported the construction of our resiliency center in Millbrook. And having those types of wraparound services are critical in order to build upon what we're creating here in Mi'kma'ki. Anyway, I won't get too far in, because then I'll lose time. Anyway, so of this work, we did engagement throughout all of our communities, on and off reserve throughout the whole province, and that was in partnership with Tajikeimɨk. Tajikeimɨk got some amazing funding that Lindsay will talk a little bit more about that supported this work, and we learned a number of things. And one, that families want choice. They want to have babies in community. They also want to have babies in hospital. They want to have choice in the matter. They want to be able to have their ceremonies back and not gatekeep the ceremonies, but to have them readily available and accessible knowledge within all of our hospitals across the province. They want to be able to have access to midwifery no matter what community they live in. And right now, that's not possible for all Nova Scotians, let alone Mi'kmaq Nova Scotians. So that needs to be addressed and changed. And being able to teach the hospitals what our ceremonies are like, how to offer it, be able to provide that knowledge and space for families to be able to do that. What else am I forgetting? A number of things that need to be trained on. So that would be bringing a midwifery training program to Nova Scotia. Currently, the closest English program would be in Ontario. And we are starting that work, but certainly we'll need Nova Scotia to step up and help to bring that here for all of us. Also lactation consultants, doula training, and we also heard that fathers want father doulas. And that was the first time I ever heard that one, but they want supports on how to be a better dad. And one of the things that we know about MMIWG here in Nova Scotia, unfortunately, the vast majority of our murders have been a result of family violence. And that's not just for women and girls and Two-Spirit people, it's also for our men and boys. And that needs to be addressed, and that is a direct impact of all of the negative effects of colonization. What else am I forgetting? I think I got it. Anyway, it'll come back in the questions, I'm sure, if I forgot something.
Thank you. I invite Ms. Peach.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to join you today for this important conversation. And also thank you for the land acknowledgement. It's particularly important, I think, for our discussion today. We need to acknowledge that the relationship between the province and the Mi'kmaq is nation to nation. We also need to acknowledge the legacy of intergenerational trauma, poverty, and racism. Colonization and laws created by the Government of Canada has had deliberate and multi-generational impact on Mi'kmaq parenting. Laws which forced Indigenous peoples onto reserve lands, denying them access to food and medicines, and intentionally separated children from their families and placed them in the residential school system or into child welfare in a deliberate attempt to eliminate the passing of language and culture to future generations. This has resulted in poverty and children removed from community through residential schools and the child welfare system. It has also led to inadequate access to health care and racism. But this is not just historical. It continues today. The Mi'kmaq continue to face inadequate access to health care, inadequate resources for community health programs, and racism within the provincial health system. But there are efforts underway to change that. Tajikeimɨk is the new and developing health and wellness organization being created to lead health transformation for the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia. Health transformation is the process of the Mi'kmaq taking control of the design and delivery of their health and wellness services. The goal is to improve overall health for individuals, for communities, and for the nation. Tajikeimɨk is accountable to communities. Our work is guided by the 13 health directors, chiefs, and the Mi'kmaq Grand Council. We advance health and wellness together as a nation. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today for a focused conversation on Indigenous midwifery and reconciliation. The Mi'kmaq have one of the fastest growing birth rates in Nova Scotia, but access to midwifery services in Mi'kmaq communities is extremely limited. There is not always pre- or postnatal care available. This situation is a result of structural racism. When midwifery legislation was developed in Nova Scotia, it did not include Indigenous midwifery practices, and there was no engagement with the Mi'kmaq about where services would be offered or the particular needs of Indigenous families. Indigenous people living in Halifax have access to the IWK midwifery program. However, only one of the 13 Mi'kmaq communities in the province falls within the service catchment area of the current provincial midwifery program. Further compounding this situation is the lack of midwifery training available in Nova Scotia, as Karen said. Anyone who wants to become a midwife must leave the province and their support systems to train. As a result, there are only 2 Mi'kmaq midwives, neither of whom are currently practicing midwifery in Nova Scotia. Providing women and babies with Indigenous midwives is an act of reconciliation. We need to revive Mi'kmaq birth practices now, or they could be lost by future generations. Informed by the engagement completed by the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association, the vision for Indigenous midwifery is clear. Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq want access to safe birthing spaces for Indigenous women in communities, reflecting traditional Mi'kmaq ceremonies, teaching, and traditions. Developing a sustainable Indigenous midwifery program in Nova Scotia cannot be accomplished by the Mi'kmaq alone. It requires collaboration with federal and provincial health system partners and taking action together to improve health outcomes for Mi'kmaq women, children, and families. W'alaaliak.
Ms. MacDonald.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to speak to you today. My name is Jessica MacDonald, and I'm a registered midwife, the president of the Association of Nova Scotia Midwives, and the Nova Scotia representative on the board of directors for the Canadian Association of Midwives. The Association of Nova Scotia Midwives is the provincial organization representing registered midwives in the profession of midwifery in Nova Scotia. Our purpose and our mission is to provide leadership, support, and advocacy for midwifery as a vital part of the primary healthcare system. Midwifery is fundamental to primary health and provides high-quality maternity and newborn services. Midwifery care should be accessible to all Nova Scotian families, especially those who are most vulnerable. The vast majority of Nova Scotians do not have access to midwifery care, which means they do not have access to the provider of their choice. There are currently 16 midwifery positions in the province across 3 sites, the Highland Community Midwives in Antigonish, the South Shore Community Midwives in Lunenburg, and the IWK Community Midwives in the HRM. Midwives provide primary care to families throughout pregnancy, labor, birth, and the postpartum and newborn period. In 2021, only 5% of births in Nova Scotia were midwifery-led, which is significantly lower than other jurisdictions across Canada. Despite the overwhelming demand for care, approximately 50% of individuals requesting midwifery care do not have access due to the lack of government investment in the profession. And this does not accurately account for regions within our provinces that do not, or province that do not have access to midwives, such as Cape Breton and Annapolis Valley. The #1 reason for admission to hospital in Canada and in Nova Scotia is birth. We have ample evidence to support midwifery as a cost-effective option that provides excellent clinical outcomes, including decreased rates of interventions in labor, less need for anesthesia, fewer NICU admissions, lower cesarean section rates, increased rates of breastfeeding, increased satisfaction with birth experience, and shorter hospital stays. An economic evaluation of the midwifery program in Nova Scotia conducted in 2018 concluded that the midwifery program is cost-effective and represents value for money when compared to maternity-related services provided by family physicians. In 2011, the Department of Health and Wellness commissioned an external assessment of midwifery in the province, which provided clear recommendations to the government to increase midwifery care access. 12 years later, many of these steps have not been implemented. We have heard time and time again that the current midwifery program requires strengthening and stabilization, but the key to stabilization is investment and growth. The Association of Nova Scotia Midwives is eager to work in partnership with the witnesses called here today to increase access to midwifery care and to support the work to restore Indigenous midwifery. Because I'd like to acknowledge that while I speak on regulated midwifery in Nova Scotia that has been regulated since 2009, the history of midwifery in Mi'kmaq goes back to as long as there have been Indigenous people on this land. I look forward to this morning's discussion.
Thank you. Ms. Penney.
Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to thank the chair and the committee for allowing me the opportunity to join today. My name is Tanya Penney, and I'm the Senior Executive Director within the Department of Health and Wellness. I'm pleased to be joined by the many witnesses here today to speak about access to midwifery and the efforts towards reconciliation. Midwifery services are an important part of primary health care, and since 2019, the Department of Health and Wellness has been focused on stabilizing midwifery services within existing teams and locations as we work with Nova Scotia Health and the IWK to explore further expansion. Our goal is to ensure that childbearing people and their families have reasonable access to evidence-informed, culturally safe, reliable pregnancy, birthing, postpartum, and newborn care. There is no one-size-fits-all solution for people accessing this type of care, as everyone has different birthing needs and preferences. While there are no immediate plans to expand midwifery services, we continue to work with Nova Scotia Health and the IWK to see how we can increase access to the services, as well as work with Tajikeimɨk to better understand the needs of the Mi'kmaq communities of Nova Scotia. We are committed to eliminating anti-Indigenous racism and discrimination within the healthcare system and aim to create a safer and more accessible healthcare system for all Indigenous people living in the province. Government has a role to play, but equally important, is the involvement of community who know their members best. Often it is the initiatives that are grown out of community that best serve the needs of those in that community. In closing, there are challenges with the current healthcare system, and we are working hard to address those issues in a way that provides equitable access to care, no matter where in the province people live. But before we expand services, we need to stabilize our existing midwifery services. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Cashen.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to meet with the committee today. As mentioned, my name is Nancy Cashen, and I'm the Director of Interprofessional Practice and Learning at IWK Health. As the healthcare system in Nova Scotia continues its evolution, IWK Health leads the provision of healthcare for women, children, youth, and families across the Maritimes. With partnership throughout the healthcare system, including patients and families, the IWK strives to create and support diverse communities, respond to health inequities, and advocate for women, children, and youth. The IWK is committed to a relentless focus on the patient and family experience, partnered with an environment that supports and celebrates equity, diversity, and inclusion with our people. IWK Health is home to the IWK Community Midwifery Team and is one of 3 sites in the province where midwifery services are offered. Registered midwives in Nova Scotia are integrated into the provincial healthcare system and work collaboratively with physicians, nurses, and other healthcare professionals to provide the best possible obstetrical and newborn care for birthing individuals. Midwives have been a valuable addition to IWK care teams since first being introduced in 2009. The IWK Community Midwifery Team is the largest in the province and is 9.0 FTE for positions. However, currently we only have 6 FTE that are filled, as 3 team members are on leaves of absences. Over the past year, we have been unsuccessful in hiring temporary positions to cover the current leaves, as attempt has resulted in 0 candidates to interview. There's simply not enough registered midwives practicing across the country. We need to gain more practicing midwives in the province. The current shortage in Canada is resulting in a significant human health resource challenge that, combined with a lack of formal midwifery education locally, has placed the Maritimes in a vulnerable position when attempting to fill both temporary and permanent midwifery positions. With that said, I am pleased to report that the IWK Community Midwives led or assisted with over 170 births in the last year, with an additional 38 home births. I thank you for inviting me to participate in this session today, and am more than happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you. And I also wanted to make a note, the presence of Chief Legislative Counsel beside me, Gordon Hebb, and Legislative Committee Clerk, Tamara Nusebi. We're going to move on to the question period and remind everyone to wait just until I acknowledge your name and your light turns red before speaking so that Ledge TV can pick up your remarks. And I'm going to start the first round of questioning. It's a 20-minute round for each caucus, and we will begin with MLA McGuire.
Thank you for being here today. I have a few questions. So my question to Ms. Penney and Ms. MacDonald, it's just a quick question, for anyone actually, to be frank with you, is midwifery healthcare?
Which one? Ms. Penney?
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you like a description of midwifery healthcare?
Is yes or no, is midwifery healthcare?
Yes, midwifery is healthcare and part of the primary healthcare system.
MLA McGuire.
So midwifery is healthcare, yet we don't have access to midwifery from one corner of this province to the other. There are places in this province that have zero access to midwifery. There is 16 positions, 6 are filled. Is that what we just heard? Full-time positions that are working now. There's 2 or 3, I think I heard, that are out. So right now, if we wanted access to midwifery, there's only 6 individuals right now that we have access to. Is that what I just heard?
Ms. Cashen.
Just to clarify, that's for the IWK FTE. Okay. So there's 6 out of the 9. That's not provincial. So that's just for the IWK midwifery team.
So
MLA McGuire.
If I'm in Cape Breton, do I have access to midwifery, Ms. MacDonald?
Ms. MacDonald.
So there are 14 of the 16 positions filled right now, 7 out of 9 at the IWK. So there are 2 full-time positions that are open at the IWK right now that are posted as temporary positions for maternity leaves. One of the positions in that 9.0 is actually a casual position, as that midwife is off on an educational leave. There are 4 midwives at the Antigonish site out of St. Martha's Regional and 4 midwives in the South Shore. So if you're in Cape Breton, the Highland Community Midwives catchment expands a little bit into Cape Breton, but not very far. So if you're northern Cape Breton, you do not have access to midwifery care.
MLA McGuire.
What's the pay for a full-time midwifery? Midwife.
Ms. MacDonald.
It's an hourly wage that ranges from, I believe, with the recent increase, it's between $40 to $55 an hour.
MLA McGuire.
Why then do we? So we just heard that there was 0 applicants. So as the Association of Nova Scotia Midwives and for the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association, why then? Do you think, what is the issue? Why are we having such a hard time attracting people to the profession? And what can be done from the government side? This is a government that was elected on healthcare. And they're very narrow focused on what healthcare is, right? So there's a government that said they will spend anything, we've heard it from the Premier, they will spend any amount of money necessary to fix healthcare. Yet, time and time again, whether it's public accounts, whether it's community services, whether it's whatever committee I'm on, we hear different, we'll call them branches of healthcare coming in saying, we're getting nothing, we don't have the resources we need, we don't have the funding we need. So what is it that we need to say to this government, and what do we need to attract the individuals to this profession? If you had a magic wand.
Ms. MacDonald.
So the biggest issue for recruitment and retention of midwives is midwifery education. And as it's been mentioned, there's no options or opportunities for midwifery education in the Atlantic region. As I mentioned, there's 5% of births right now in Nova Scotia being attended by midwives. And when we look at provinces like Ontario or British Columbia, those provinces have about 20% or 25% of their births being led by midwives. And those are the provinces, as Karen mentioned, that have access to midwifery education opportunities. So really the first step would be investing in a midwifery education program in Atlantic Canada, whether it's in Nova Scotia or the other Atlantic provinces, to really recruit midwives here, because the reality is we just don't have have midwives that are, sitting at home in the province that are unemployed, because they'd be taking those positions, right? There's around 2,000 midwives working across Canada, so there's not necessarily a lack of midwives in the country. Obviously, we'd love to see that number grow, but really it's the Atlantic region that's suffering because we don't have education opportunities here.
MLA McGuire.
I want to pose this question to Ms. Penney. One of the things that you said is that you're not looking to expand the program, you're looking to stabilize the program. It's clear that the program does need to be expanded. What do you mean by stabilizing the program?
Ms. Penney.
So part of what you've already heard is that full-time positions are not being filled and they're going vacant despite the fact that they're being posted. And so that's what I mean by stabilize, right? Make sure that the current kind of 3 sites that we have delivering midwifery services is actually got their positions filled and able to deliver services in those 3 areas. Nova Scotia, just in October of 2022, did sign on with the other Atlantic provinces to conduct a feasibility study for a midwifery educational institution in the Maritimes. And so hoping that work will be done relatively soon. Newfoundland's leading the work, and Nova Scotia, PEI, and New Brunswick are supporting it. So hoping then to have a conversation about what expansion services looks like.
MLA McGuire.
When are you expecting that program, that feasibility study? I mean, I'm sure this isn't the first feasibility study on midwifery. When do you expect that study to be done?
Ms. Penney.
So I don't have a time frame for that. I can certainly look for the timelines from the consultant that was hired by Newfoundland and get back to the committee with that. It is, to my understanding, the first feasibility study of an Atlantic educational institution for midwifery, to my understanding and the understanding of my colleagues in a committee called ACRE, so the Atlantic Academic Healthcare Educational Committee.
MLA McGuire.
So in the interim, while this feasibility study is being done, we do have a desperate need for midwives. So part of stabilizing this program is looking to the future, but also looking to the now. So what is being done in the now to attract more midwives to Nova Scotia and to get access to every community and have the Indigenous community, the African Nova Scotian communities represented in midwifery programs? What is being done now? Not the consulting, but now.
Ms. Penney.
So I think the educational feasibility study is exceptionally important. 2 out of the 3 of my colleagues to my right have made that point. Getting education closer to home will actually ensure that people in Nova Scotia that want to take midwifery don't have to go to Ontario. There are 5 educational institutions that the Registry of Midwives accept in this province. One of them is Francophone, and the other 4, 2 in Ontario, and the other 2 kind of Manitoba, Alberta-ish.
Alberta and BC.
Alberta and BC. So part of the longer range plan is making sure that we can educate people closer to home. The other pieces around primary health care and midwifery and people's choice is really around the bolstering and stabilization of primary health care as a whole. When you specifically talk about midwifery, Nova Scotia Health and the IWK are really working hard to recruit in all of their vacant positions. And I'm sure you've heard that in other committees in the past, kind of some of the things that they're doing around recruitment incentives and retention incentives. And so I think that work is well known.
MLA McGuire.
So what has been done in the short term to recruit? What incentives are there? What financial incentives have been put in place over the last 2 years to recruit new midwives, and how many new midwives have been recruited to this province over the last 2 years? He said there's financial incentives and there's incentives in place in the short term. So what are those incentives specifically?
Ms. Penney.
So the recruitment incentives and the kind of coming back into the public space in a recent announcement would be the two that I would think of immediately. That being said, I would have to talk to my Nova Scotia Health and IWK HR colleagues about the number of people who have been hired over the last 2-3 years. I think what I heard from your question and what recruitment incentives are specific for midwives. That being said, there's a lot of general recruitment and retention initiatives through both the Nova Scotia Health and the IWK. But I'll ask that very specific question.
Emily McGuire.
So I'm asking that you table, or that you have it tabled to the committee, what incentives were in place over the last couple of years for Indigenous, African Nova Scotian, and midwives for all the communities. How many were attracted and retained, and what specifically programs were in place to attract new midwives to this province? Because it doesn't seem like it's working when you have 0 applicants. So realistically, it doesn't seem like there is an option. So what's the wait list right now? How long is the wait list for individuals looking for midwives?
Ms. Cashen.
I don't have a time because, as you can appreciate, pregnancy is time-bound. But the total of number of people for IWK, again, I'm just speaking for IWK site, that wanted midwifery care in the past year and that remained on a wait list was 173.
Emily McGuire.
173. And how many individuals had access to, at the IWK, the midwifery program?
Ms. Cashen.
So in total, the people who wanted midwifery care was 485 individuals, 485 families. But included in that would be our numbers of individuals who had pregnancy loss. So I just caveat that.
So
Emily McGuire.
what happens to those 173 individuals waiting for midwifery?
Ms. Cashen.
So they are then rerouted to primary health, and their first choice would not be met, and asking or seeking for midwifery care.
Emily McGuire.
So how many, we're sitting, how many new midwives would have to be hired to accommodate? And in the last, we'll just say the last budget, what was the increase to the midwifery program? And what was the request from, or was there a request from the Department of Health and or the IWK for funding for programs? And obviously for a school, like, it's great to have reports and feasibility studies and stuff like that, but we know it works. We've heard from the Association of Nova Scotia Midwives that it has had an impact in other jurisdictions. So I don't know what else we need to do. So when can we expect, first two-part question, was there a request for funding to increase, and how much was it? And when can we expect education here in Nova Scotia?
Ms. Penney.
I'll answer your second question first, in that I don't know. I will connect with my Newfoundland, New Brunswick, and PEI colleagues and find out where the study is and what the anticipated timelines for that are. And the first question is that there was no new monies for midwifery in the last budget. We were really focused on stabilizing the current 16 FTEs that were not filled.
Emily McGuire.
I mean, I don't understand, and no offense, but I don't understand stabilizing. I don't understand that. The programs, to me, doesn't seem stable. A stable program would have equal access no matter where you're at where you live. That to me would be an equitable and stable program. And yet, we just heard today that there is certain parts of this province that have zero access to the program. So part of stability would be increasing access, right? So I know, like, we have, my partner and I, we have 3 children. And I know that at one point she looked at midwifery and didn't do it because of what she felt was lack of access. And I know that my colleague Ian Rankin, who's a big supporter and actually had a large plank in our platform for midwifery, who called me for about a half hour before I got here, did. And so part of the stability is that access. And will this be changing, like, over the next 12 months? I mean, okay, so the last budget, it's about stability. The next budget will be hopefully about having things in place in a school and education, things like that. Can we say within the next 12 months, access to, no matter who you are, where you live, or what your economic situation is, that you will have access to the midwifery program if you want?
Ms. Penney?
So midwifery is an absolute important health service and part of primary health care. That being said, with an inability to fill FTEs that are currently funded, it is very difficult over the next 12 months to talk about expansion. We are working with our colleagues across the healthcare system. I think Lindsay was the one that mentioned there are 2 Indigenous midwifery candidates who aren't even working right now. And so we absolutely need to work with communities to sort out how it is that we increase access to midwifery services in the province. There are not enough right now to fill current positions.
I hear talk about
Ms. Pictou.
I hear talk about stabilization. However, the current system and how it's set up has blocked us out of utilization of that system. The current system says that people should have access to have home births within an hour catchment of the IWK. However, Siboney continues to be blocked out of receiving access. So when we talk about stability, we have to acknowledge that Mi'kmaq people aren't part of that stability system that you talk about. And even if we were, it's not enough. We need this within community. We need to be able to have control of this our own selves. It needs to be created through a lens designed by the Mi'kmaq for the Mi'kmaq and for two-spirit and gender diverse people. And this has to happen within community. We are doing a pilot project, and we will have 4 midwives hired ourselves by the end of this fiscal year. And we already started working on the designs for a birthing unit for Buckingig First Nation, because they have a well-established midwifery system already within their catchment area. So we will be looking to the province to make investments within that so that we can start that and then build on that. We've also been having conversations about how to get midwifery training here in the province. We've talked to McMaster University. We've talked to our own knowledge experts who's already conducted a feasibility study on bringing back midwifery in Unama'ki. So this work has begun. We just need an investment, and we need government to give women back control over our own healthcare. And you say, why is it lacking? Because it's a gendered healthcare issue, and that's the real issue here. Yeah.
Thank you. MLA McGuire with 1 minute.
Thank you. I don't even know how to follow up on that. So when you said blocking out, can you explain that?
I'm not
Ms. Pictou with 50 seconds.
I'm not sure that I'm the one to ask that question to, because I'm not sure why individuals in Siboney aren't able to give birth within community. That would be, I think, a question to the Nova Scotia Midwifery Association.
Okay, Ms. MacDonald.
Sure. So because of our regulatory guidelines with our regulatory council, we have catchment areas assigned to each group. So the IWK midwives, the Antigonish midwives, and the Social midwives all have a catchment in which they're supposed to take clients in from those areas. And because of the logistics around being associated with a hospital to provide hospital birth, it really limits us in how far we can expand that. So we'll have intakes that come in out of catchment, and for some people we'll try to accommodate out of catchment applications because we know that our services are valuable and it is so important to be able to offer that service. But because of the kind of hospital legalities around being associated with a specific geographical area, it really limits us in the services that we can provide. And it also means that because of the limited number of midwives, that we don't have enough midwives to have midwives out of catchment, because then there's not midwives close to hospital.
Sorry to cut you off there. The time for liberal questioning has ended, so we'll move on to the NDP with Ms. MLA LeBlanc.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being here. I just want to start by acknowledging that the very structure of this committee meeting is colonial. And so, you know, this government system that we all work in part of, or as part of, is a colonial structure, and I deeply appreciate your presence here to be a part of it, because I don't know what it's like to be in your head, but I would imagine it's deeply frustrating at this moment because of what you've just said, Ms. Pictou, which is that, you know, the structures that we're even talking about right now, the health authority, blah, 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 it doesn't take into account the true nature of what healthcare is for everyone in the province. So anyway, so here's the thing about stabilization, in my view. This question of stabilization, first of all, yes, I think absolutely I agree with you. The reason we're even having this discussion right now is because this is a gendered healthcare topic, and if men or people with penises, excuse me, because if people with penises were giving birth and midwives were proven to be helpful, there would be midwives everywhere in this province, everywhere in the world. That is basic. We cannot stabilize a workforce with temporary jobs. Okay, so I know people, I have friends who are midwives who have contacted me about this and said, oh, I hear that you're talking about midwifery and thank you so much. You know, I would love to move to Nova Scotia and start a family here. I would love to reroute or uproot my family and bring them to Nova Scotia. But I'm not going to do it for a 12-month job. So this idea of stabilization is something we're hearing a lot from this government, and I just want to call it out. I think it is smoke and mirrors. We cannot stabilize a workforce if we're not actually going to invest in it. So I wish people would just stop saying it. The minister says it, Ms. Penney, with respect, you're saying it, everyone is saying it in the healthcare system. It's like, oh, this is a good way to explain it, but it's not. It's not true. It doesn't make sense. So in the way to stabilize a workforce is to invest money, add new full-time positions, make midwifery a career that people can see themselves doing in this place. And on top of that, and that is just like the colonial part of it. And so I just need to say, like, I'm sorry, but I didn't even realize that this was like how racist this issue is. I've always looked at this issue of the lack of midwives and the lack of support as a healthcare situation, and as a white person, I've just thought, like, it's bad, everyone needs a midwife, blah, blah, blah. Didn't even consider how racist it is and how colonial it is. And so I just want to, as we were talking, I looked up the calls to justice from the murdered and missing women and girls in Two-Spirit. I'm sorry, I can't really read right now because I can't see. And on page 9 of the recommendations of the calls to justice, there are many calls to justice for healthcare, but I'll read one where this applies. We call upon all governments to provide adequate, stable, equitable, and ongoing funding for Indigenous-centered and community-based health and wellness services that are accessible and culturally appropriate and that meet the health and wellness needs of Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA people. The lack of health and wellness services within Indigenous communities continues to force Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA people to relocate in order to access care. Governments must ensure that health and wellness services are available and accessible within Indigenous communities wherever Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQIA people reside. So it's right there. And if that is not happening, then what we are doing in this province is fundamentally racist, and we and colonial, and we have to change it. And if that is not the reason, or if all the other things that we've talked about today are not the reasons, then that has to be the reason. So I'm floored. Sorry. So I have a question for you, Ms. Pictou, which is, so can you clarify the two Indigenous or Mi'kmaq people who are midwives, and are they living in Mi'kmaq? Are they practicing sort of out of the system, or are they just waiting to be able to practice? What is the situation there? And I'm also wondering if you could talk about models elsewhere in Turtle Island, where this might be working better, that we could model, that we could just say, look, they're doing it there, why can't we do it here?
Ms. Pictou.
One of our Mi'kmaq midwives is currently hired under our pilot project as the project lead, and she's doing a lot of research and looking at those models. Looking at how we can implement and also looking at what our, Indigenous birthing rights and, this type of work here. It is our hope that she will be hired on as a practicing midwife when we have birthing units in community. Our other Mi'kmaq midwife is currently employed in Ontario, and that's where she had done training and is married and currently resides. She has been doing some work with us as far as being engaged within the development of decolonizing birthing here in Nova Scotia. What was the other part of your question again? Oh yeah, models elsewhere. So there's a variety of models to look at. Currently, we're looking at doing we can't say for sure yet, because ultimately it'll be up to the health directors and the chiefs to decide how we end up designing our midwifery model within Nova Scotia. But certainly there needs to be a front-end training. So whether it's purchasing the curriculum from McMaster and housing it at one of our universities, also there's dialogue around whether it should be housed within the medical school or within a nursing school, whether Unama'ki College, for example, may be a good option, because then we can do training within community as well as on campus. But also looking at how can we build an apprenticeship type of model so that we can be training more midwives and having that built into our training system here. In my former career, I worked in employment and I was on the board of directors for Apprenticeship Nova Scotia, and I know that's, not the same type of apprenticeship training that we're talking about, but certainly I think looking at models like that, we may be able to look at prior learning and take individuals that have other medical training and be able to fast track them through to becoming a midwife. So I think that should be looked at sooner than later to be able to fill more positions within the province.
Thank you. MLA LeBlanc.
Thanks. So I believe you said you were from Millbrook. So when people are having babies in Millbrook, where do they go to birth their babies? Do they go to Truro? Do they go to Halifax? Where do they go?
Ms. Pictou.
Thank you for asking that question, actually. So Millbrook is one of the communities that do not provide prenatal care within community. So despite Millbrook's financial position and close location to other services, we still don't have prenatal care within community. So we go to the women's clinic in Truro, which I think almost every woman in Truro goes to. You share, I think, 4 doctors amongst everyone. So oftentimes you don't know who's going to be there when you give birth. The system is very dependent on the effective communication between those doctors to inform, of any risks in a pregnancy. So I've personally seen birthers in Millbrook fall through the cracks because of a lack of communication between the healthcare providers. So certainly Millbrook needs to be able to have more access to all aspects of prenatal and postnatal care.
Emily LeBlanc.
Thank you. So I just want to ask Ms. MacDonald a couple questions about midwifery right now. Do you have any stats, like you mentioned, like that we know that midwifery is, there's less chance of complications, surgeries, C-sections, that kind of thing with midwifery care. Do you have any numbers in terms of how many primary care physicians are delivering babies? How, if we took that load off of primary care physicians and offered it to midwifery care, how many doctor hours would that free up, that kind of thing, in Nova Scotia?
Ms. MacDonald.
So I do have stats from the births at the IWK from 2012 to 2021. Over a 10-year period, there were 2.9% of births led by midwives, 47.9% led by family physicians, and 49.2% led by obstetricians. Now, we can theorize that some of the births that were led by obstetricians were not high-risk pregnancies, which is what OBs are specialized to provide care for. So some of that number could be actually decreased if we had midwives providing care to more low-risk pregnancies, and then certainly our family physicians as well.
And sorry, how many, what was it?
Emily LeBlanc.
I missed the percentage of midwife births.
It was
Ms. MacDonald.
It was 3%. It has since increased. It's increased provincially to 5%, but at the IWK over 10 years, which did see a lot of changes in numbers of midwives working in that 10-year period, but it was 3% over 10 years.
Emily LeBlanc.
Yeah, well, I've said this before, and I'm sure everyone has heard it, but I will say it again. When I got pregnant, my family doctor, who used to deliver babies, just stopped delivering because she was older and didn't really want to get up in the middle of the night anymore. Fair enough. And so I was then referred to the perinatal center at the IWK, which was great, but also probably wholly unnecessary for both of my births, right? And it, I can't even imagine how much it cost the system and how much savings could have been had, because I did on my first pregnancy, picked up the phone and did that same thing that MLA McGuire's partner did, which was try to find a midwife, and then was told there's no way, you're just not going to get one, you're just not going to make the list. So it shocks me to think about that, if this government has been elected to fix healthcare, that these very sensible savings, financial savings, and also savings in, again, surgery, booking ORs and that kind of thing. It only makes sense to actually take some of the money that we're spending and put it into not only stabilizing, but actually building and making healthy a midwife program here. If my colleague is ready to take over, I would happily cede my time.
Emily Coombs.
Thank you. So the one thing that caught my attention, it's funny enough because I was speaking with a social worker last night, and we were having this deep conversation about DCS. And we were talking about how we talk a lot about moms and the mother in DCS, especially within child welfare. But we talked about how the fact that we don't ask about the father in DCS. We don't talk about the supports for the father. And so I found it, Ms. Pictou, when you brought up the concept of fathers wanting doulas. And I think that it expands into this question of where do you see midwifery, not just in the grand scheme, not just in healthcare, not just about looking at the efficiencies within healthcare, but actually within the Department of Community Services, specifically around child apprehension. Where do you see midwifery in that aspect?
Ms. Pictou.
I think they're separate, first of all. Yeah, sure.
MLA Coombs.
So I'll just explain what I mean. You spoke about, we talk about preventative in early years, whereas midwives, doulas, often it's the postnatal. So after birth, family is settling in. Those first several months are very important to families and stabilize, and the family's dynamic has changed, right? And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. That is the time where the issues such as after the child's born, we had the birth alerts, but we also have the concept of moms and dads often need help after baby is born. You're not given a guide of how to raise a child. And so I'm just wondering, do you see that as a preventative measure, as one of those things of check-ins and being a part of community and helping with those wraparound supports and resources?
Ms. Pictou.
I think that midwifery provides a continuum of care that gives us better insight about the needs of the family. So I think that we'll be able to detect early if additional supports need to be provided to either the birther or other members of the family, and also identifying who their supports are, and in bringing back Mi'kmaq protocols and traditions around having babies, because it's a community a collective responsibility to take care of one another. And so, part of that is providing meals, helping with other kids, cleaning the house, making sure that mom's being able to rest and taking off all of these pressures. But also, not every birth is a happy outcome. And so also supporting families during those times as well. I forgot the rest of the question. There was something else I wanted to say. Remind me what your original, about DCS. So it can inform us when wraparound supports are needed, but preventative care or preventative practices around what we would consider to be primary health care within our Mi'kmaq ways of understanding health and wellness. And those things don't belong within the Department of Community Services, even if it's only funding, because it's a lack of acknowledgement, one, that it's health funding, that Mi'kmaq communities deserve health funding, and from the province as well. If that is a provincial investment, Mi'kmaq communities deserve the same investment, and it's not okay to say that we can share what's provided for everybody else. So those types of things need to be separate from the Department of Community Services, but not.
MLA Coombs.
Thank you. No, and you actually answered my question of the concept of the seeing that the wraparound supports need to be seen earlier and have that. That is kind of where I was going with the question. So you kind of nailed it. Thank you. Can you talk about how a strong provincial midwifery program can contribute to reconciliation and Indigenous health.
Ms. Pictou.
The word health in Mi'kmaq is dodgy, and Dodgy was a midwife. And she was from Eskasoni, and she was one of the last practicing Mi'kmaq midwives, actually. And probably, I think she was also the last one to catch a baby in community prior to 1970. We just recently had 2 births, our first 2 births since 1970, one within a Mi'kmaq community in Buckingham and the other at the Mi'kmaq Child Development Center in Halifax. And so, yeah, to us, yeah, sorry, I lost my train of thought. the construction is killing me. Oh my goodness. Remind me again.
MLA Coombs.
It was the connection with reconciliation.
Oh, right.
Yes.
Ms. Pictou.
It's absolutely fundamentally important because Mi'kmaq people have not had adequate access to healthcare. We still don't have adequate access to healthcare. There are still women in their 20s that are going and having emergency C-sections and coming out finding that they'd been sterilized. And that's still happening. We have just finished doing engagement on that, and that still happens. Or, you know, these are the types of things that need to end in order for it to be safe for Mi'kmaq people to access healthcare in Nova Scotia.
Order. Sorry to cut you off, but the time for NDP questioning has elapsed, and we will now move on to the PC caucus. MLA Barkos.
Thank you, Chair. So the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association did, I gotta watch it, they don't hear me if I don't have it close, did some community engagements. I'm just wondering what was learned from that. Ms. Penney, or Pictou.
Ms. Pictou.
So we learned that Mi'kmaq families want to be able to have choice. They want to be able to have babies in community. They want to be able to have access to midwives. They want to be able to have access to doulas, lactation consultants. They want to be able to have our ceremonies within the hospitals, including smudging, and they want to be able to access all of these services within community. We have a huge amount of interest in community members wanting to become midwives. They also want to be able to have family resource centers within each of the communities. What else am I forgetting? Yeah, that was most of it.
Thank you, MLA Barkos.
Thank you, Ms. Pictou. A resilient center dedicated to providing health and healing and wellness, tongue-tied to get programs to Millbrook First Nations. The center is to be run by your association. Can you speak to how this center will have an impact on the women in your community, and maybe even the men as well too?
Ms. Pictou.
It'll have an impact on all Mi'kmaq communities across Nova Scotia, but especially Millbrook and Sebaganagity and Pictou Landing, because they're closest in proximity. It provides complete wraparound supports for the entire family, is our hope. It'll provide cultural supports and teaching and space inside and outside. There will be lots of types of mental health supports, including traditional mental health supports and clinical for all ages. There'll be access to navigational services, emergency services, assistance with housing supports, exiting human trafficking, exiting domestic violence. food security, you name it. We've basically gone to all of our Mi'kmaq communities. We've talked about what are the gaps, what are the challenges, what do we need in order to be able to be healthy in all ways. And we've developed this resiliency center to be reflective of a holistic Mi'kmaq health approach. So I'm the descendant of a residential school survivor, and saying that, my dad could have benefited from the types of supports that we give. It's the whole family. Yes, it's run by Nova Scotia Native women, but in order for women to be healthy, we need our whole family to be healthy. And having supports for our men, our fathers, our uncles, our brothers, our sons is absolutely critical, and oftentimes they don't ask for help. And the way that we're building this, no one has to ask for help. It's just there all the time. It's built into everything that we will be doing. So we have lots of more exciting things that we hope to announce in the near future, but certainly we will be looking for an investment from Nova Scotia to be able to offer the programs and services at the Resiliency Center, and also a future investment in birthing units, not just in Buckingate, but also in Millbrook. We're hoping to put a second birthing unit there after the Buckingate one is complete.
Thank you. MLA Barkos.
That's fantastic. I can feel your excitement and hear it, so that's great. Ms. Penney, could you tell us about how the province is ensuring pregnant women, or pregnant people, I guess would be the way to say it, have access to care that they need while giving birth, and the role of midwifery has in the whole suite of things, or services, I should say.
Ms. Penney.
Do you mind if I let the IWK clinicians speak to that first, and then I can fill in any gaps? Perfect, thank you.
Ms. Cashen.
So, Ms. Barkos, do you want to know through the whole pregnancy, or is there a particular time? I'm sorry, I just didn't hear that.
MLA Barkos.
You'd think after 2 years I've gotten used to the mic myself. You know what, while giving birth, let's just stick with that, because I'll eat our whole 20 minutes up.
Ms. Cashen.
So as we have discussed earlier, midwives provide safe, holistic care to the family and the birthing individual. They help with the transition of the baby being born from utero into the environment. And there are many, and I think Jessica MacDonald would be able to speak much more eloquently than what I'm fumbling as a midwife. I'm not a midwife by background, but they absolutely are essential in that transition period. Following birth and postpartum, there are many things that they specialize in. We heard around the decreased stats in infection, also increased rates of breastfeeding, and we have lots of positive feedback from the community that utilize midwifery services, so that there is huge satisfaction from individuals who do use the service. And I don't know, Jessica, if you want to add anything that I've left out. I'm sure, like I said, you can speak to it much more eloquently than I.
Oops. Ms. MacDonald.
Sure. So midwifery scope of practice is essentially from the beginning of pregnancy right through until 6 weeks postpartum. So we typically meet clients around 10 weeks of pregnancy and see them on a monthly and then biweekly and weekly basis, kind of as the pregnancy goes along, to talk about all of the kind of topics that would come up throughout pregnancy, offer some education, offer diagnostic tests and screenings like any other prenatal care provider would. And as Karen mentioned, we're also able to kind of establish a relationship with our clients in that time, so that when things present postpartum, we can kind of identify risk factors that may be present for lack of support or concerns that people are having, because our care extends beyond. We're talking a lot about birth right now and statistics around birth, but our care does extend to that 6 weeks of postpartum care, and we're offering that care in the home for the first week or two postpartum. So it just means that families don't have to pack up their newborn and go into the hospital, which for some people may be an hour drive, in that first week to have care. We're going to them in the first days postpartum to make sure that they're doing well, that baby's doing well, that their whole family is doing well and feels supported, and that continues right up until 6 weeks.
MLA Barkos.
Thank you, I appreciate. I'm going to share now with MLA Harrison.
MLA Harrison.
With that, one of my questions just got answered. This is an education for me. My goodness, it's a whole new world, I guess. That's opening up for me. Just the benefits and also the need, I guess, to have this stuff put in place. Midwifery put in place. To the department, could you share an update on the efforts to recruit in the Mi'kmaq communities?
Ms. Penney.
So I can talk to it a little bit from an overarching kind of perspective. I know, and I will lean on Lindsay a little bit because I might get some of the details of this project wrong, but we just in the last 9 to 12 months, outside of midwifery, but inside kind of nursing, spent some time working with Lanu, the one-door admission, and started to strategize and support an investment to help Indigenous nurses support Indigenous students coming into the system, being able to give them things like, sometimes people don't have access to a credit card, and so how do we actually kind of get around that admission fee, help them fill out those admission paperworks, and working with Dalhousie, St. FX, Cape Breton University on some designated Indigenous African Nova Scotian seats. And so we've been really successful in that space. I don't know, Lindsay, if there's anything you'd like to add. It wasn't, again, kind of specific from a midwifery perspective, but really working differently with Tajikeimɨk from a recruitment perspective has been a part of what we've been focusing on lately.
Ms. Peach.
Thank you. So maybe I could add to that a little bit. So from a midwifery perspective, there is only one of the provincial programs currently. That's the one that's based in Antigonish that serves one of the Mi'kmaq communities. And so recruitment not specific there for Mi'kmaq individuals that I'm aware of. As Karen said, as part of the project that we're undertaking with Nova Scotia Native Women's, it is to establish a site for midwifery in Buttingek, and that would include recruitment, of course, specific for Mi'kmaq individuals, midwives, for those positions. Broadly, on the topic of recruitment, it is a challenge, recruiting for health professionals within Mi'kmaq communities and being competitive with the province. And so I will say just, and we've had some conversation with colleagues federally and provincially around this, the bursaries and incentives don't always apply to individuals working in First Nations communities, and so that creates some added challenges from a recruitment and retention point of view. I think the other thing that I would mention around recruitment, and it is related to some of the work that we've been doing around Olnu nursing, is the acknowledgement a lot of the health professional schools designate seats for Indigenous individuals, but those designated seats aren't enough. They need to come with supports. Supports for the students that are being recruited into those programs, supports while they're in the programs, and supports when they transition into clinical practice, particularly when those settings also they encounter racism in the education system and also within the health system when they enter into practice. So wanted to emphasize those points as well. It's in part recruitment, but also the supports that are provided.
MLA Harrison.
Actually, we're so fortunate in this province to have so many different cultures, and they offer so many unique and beautiful things, really. So it really is important to get people in place that understand the culture and so on. And I hope we can move ahead on that because it is so necessary. But having said that, the postpartum was mentioned. Do you want to say a little bit more, Ms. MacDonald, on the benefits of that? Of midwifery with postpartum?
Ms. MacDonald.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, statistically, we do have increased rates of breastfeeding, and you could kind of surmise that that's likely because of the 6 weeks postpartum care that we provide. But I think it's really important for individuals to have that close follow-up postpartum. Oftentimes, you have your baby, you leave the hospital, and maybe you see your family doctor once in the first week, and then again at 6 weeks or 2 months when that child is due for their first set of vaccinations. But there's not always that close follow-up, and I think that that's really important to identify any support concerns, and also for postpartum mental health. We know that 10% of people are susceptible to postpartum depression, and offering that kind of midwifery care is a way to offer additional mental health support to people. I mentioned the piece about not having to bring their baby into the hospital. I think being able to keep people at home in the comfort of their own home provides additional support as well. And just having that continuity, it's somebody that you've already met your entire pregnancy, so you've already established a trusting relationship with. And I think that that's comforting for folks in the postpartum period to feel like they have someone that's truly listening to them, validating their concerns, validating their experiences, and making sure that even just the birth debrief, because as we've talked about, not every outcome is a good and happy outcome, and having that support to talk through difficult or challenging birth experiences is also really beneficial to people.
MLA Harrison.
I don't have any further questions, but I would like to say continue on with what you're doing, because it is, it's the best way to handle this, really. Midwifery, I think, and so good luck, and we're going to move ahead. We really are.
MLA Ritchie.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panel for being here today. I guess this question could be a twofold. Can you tell us a bit more about the health transformation in the recent MOU, Memorandum of Understanding with Nova Scotia Mi'kmaq Chiefs? We can start with Ms. Peach and maybe pass it over to Ms. Pictou. That'd be great.
Ms. Peach.
Thanks for that question. So yes, on April 21st, the Mi'kmaq Chiefs signed a trilateral MOU with the Government of Canada and the Government of Nova Scotia on health transformation. So the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia are formally on a pathway for health transformation, the establishment of a Mi'kmaq Health and Wellness organization, functionally a health authority, that will better meet the needs of the Mi'kmaq communities in Nova Scotia. That will include the transfer of federal funding and responsibility for federally funded health programs and services, but it also means that we will be working differently with the province in health planning, in decision-making and funding that impacts the Mi'kmaq communities. And that really, there's been work that's been done, I think, collaboratively with the 13 communities in the past. But having the establishment of an organization to really take a lead in some of that work is helpful. We've already seen the benefits of that. We're on a multi-year journey, so this won't happen overnight. There's a lot of work ahead, but that trilateral MOU really identifies that shared commitment to work together and to do that differently.
Thank you. And Ms. Penney, did you have anything to add? Or well, okay, back to MLA Ritchie with. Or sorry, Ms. Pictou. Yes.
Nova Scotia Native Women's Association is absolutely thrilled of Tajikeimɨk's creation and the Mi'kmaq taking back our sovereignty over healthcare. Nova Scotia Native Women's Association is recognized as a health service provider under that MOU, which is a huge historical significance to a grassroots Indigenous women's organization, and we probably are the only one across Canada recognized in such a way. Our organization just celebrated our 50th anniversary, and we have been very important part of the Mi'kmaq governance structure throughout that time, and that recognition of our role within community is absolutely beautiful and gives us the ability to really work together to be able to provide services that people feel safe going to, whether it's band run or run by us as a arm's length organization.
Thank you. With 2 minutes, Emily Ritchie.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Peach and Ms. Pictou, for those answers. Happened to be at the announcement that day. It was a pretty special announcement, and so happy to be there. That will lead me into, I guess, my second question, and this would be to Ms. MacDonald. Can you share a bit of the benefits that midwifery presents when it comes to accessing services for those who, when clinically appropriate, want to have home births?
Ms. MacDonald.
So one of the key principles of midwifery care is choice of birthplace, and so for clients that screen appropriately for being candidates for home birth, that is something that we're offering at all 3 sites within kind of that geographical catchment for clients that are low risk. And I don't know if you want me to talk about the specifics clinically of what home birth looks like, but essentially we're bringing everything that you would find at kind of a level 1 hospital. So we're bringing medical equipment with us to be able to offer that birth in home. And it's a really special thing to be able to offer to people to have that choice over where they want to give birth, whether that's, because they have roots to their community and they want to be in their community and birth a baby in their own community, but also there's a lot of fear for people to be in hospitals, and so sometimes that's the root of why they've made that decision. But regardless of what led them to that decision, it should be an informed decision that can be made and should be a choice that people have regardless of where they live in the province to be able to have a home birth if that's something that they choose. Our home birth rate in the province ranges between 15% to 20% at this time. Yeah.
Emily Ritchie, you have 24 seconds. Good.
No, I'm good. Thank
Okay.
you, Madam Chair.
We will do the second round of questioning, and we will allow 10 minutes per caucus. And again, I will interrupt this round and try to keep better track of the time for you. We'll start with MLA Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everybody, for being here and answering all of our questions so far. It's been really helpful. So I just wanted to ask a bit about the education program or potential education program, because in a past life, I did some work with the association here in Nova Scotia and the National Association as well. So got to learn about the great work that's being done across the country, and over again, I heard the number one thing we need, this is probably three plus years ago now, is an educational institution where people can go, and obviously it becomes much easier to recruit and retain as a result. So perhaps, I'm not sure who would be best equipped to answer this, but maybe I'll just pose it to Ms. MacDonald to start. In other provinces, what does the educational program look like? Is it within a university? Would it be at like an NSCC equivalent, or how would it be structured here? Do we have any sense of that?
Ms. MacDonald.
So in Canada, the university-based programs is a 4-year baccalaureate degree, and that 4 years is composed of time on campus in like course and lab-related work, and then 2.5 years of clinical placement. So usually the first year and a half is on campus, the second half or 2.5 years is clinical placements that are happening with precepting midwives at midwifery clinics located around that university. Midwifery students would travel to those sites. So if we're looking at doing that in Nova Scotia, we'd have to, we would need more midwives to be able to support students for a midwifery program, but we would expect the same thing. It would go through the Canadian Midwifery Regulators Council. Thank you, Tanya. To have that degree happening at a university here, and I would suspect that it would be a 4-year degree as well. That would be a combination of in-class and clinical work with the midwifery sites that we currently have in the province, and hopefully some more sites as well.
MLA Clark.
Thank you for that, and I guess. Ms. Penney, you said earlier that the 4 Atlantic provinces are kind of working together on this feasibility study. So is it safe to assume that if a program were to be established here, there would just be one for the Atlantic region? Is that kind of the working hypothesis, or we don't know yet?
Ms. Penney.
I think that would have been my working hypothesis when I first got involved in the feasibility study and the statement of work for that. That being said, after some conversations with Lindsay Peach and some the two Indigenous midwives that they were talking about earlier, I think as we inform that feasibility study, we'll know more and more as it gets written.
MLA Clerk.
Thank you. And earlier, Ms. MacDonald, you talked about scope of practice for midwives, and this is something we hear about a lot in the medical field, with whether it's pharmacists or nurses or whomever. We always hear about the need to expand scope of practice in many cases. So I'm just wondering, is there an opportunity to expand scope of practice for midwives currently? Is there any proposals put forward, or what would that look like in your view? Is there a need for an expansion of that scope, or is it adequate in your mind right now?
Ms. MacDonald.
Thank you. So right now, midwives are primarily working in a maternity care model that looks like providing prenatal care, care in labor and birth, and postpartum. But we know that there's a whole suite of reproductive health and newborn services that midwives could be kind of optimizing scope by expanding, I guess, what we're doing to other populations. So looking at well newborn clinics, there's a lot of people in this province that do not have a family doctor. And so even for those that aren't necessarily, we're not necessarily providing prenatal care, although we'd love to be taking care for those people as well, is that we could be offering a newborn clinic to support parents in those first few months of life to provide newborn care and well newborn checks and immunizations. There's also well women clinics that we could be providing for people that need contraceptive counseling, IUD insertions, those sorts of things. So there's definitely things that we're already doing to clients that for clients, or offering for clients that we have in care, but that could definitely be expanded. It would require some amendments to our regulations right now, because right now we're only providing care to the people that we have in care for pregnancy and then their newborns. But with a bit of some change there, we could be providing care to more people.
MLA Clerk.
Thank you, and that's a really good point. I recall when my son was born. He just turned 6 on Saturday. This is about 6 years ago now, and I remember I think we had one visit from a nurse, I think, which was awesome, and we needed that for sure. But we certainly would have taken more if we had been able to. So I think that's an interesting angle to pursue. I think in terms of not being so rigid as to say, well, this person wasn't with us during pregnancy, therefore we can't help them afterwards. I think that doesn't necessarily make sense. So I think that's a great point. Earlier you also mentioned, I think in Ontario and BC, I might have them wrong, but 2 other provinces you mentioned somewhere between 20 and 25% of births are supported by a midwife, and here in Nova Scotia, obviously, we're far, far below that. Do you think, this is a bit of a hypothetical, I know, but do you think if we were optimizing our system of midwifery in the province, do you think the demand is there in this province to reach that kind of level, where maybe 1 out of every 5 or 1 out of every 4 births is attended to by a midwife?
Ms. MacDonald.
Yeah, I certainly think that the demand is there. Just by the look of the waitlist binders at each midwifery clinic in the province alone, there's stacks of applications that don't get accepted into care because we simply don't have the resources right now to support all of the people that want care. So I would love to see us get to the numbers that we see in Ontario and BC, and you're correct in saying it was 20 and 25% of births.
MLA Clerk.
Thank you. And obviously the educational piece is a huge one that we've talked about a lot today, but are there other practices that other jurisdictions follow that we can use here in Nova Scotia to help make the midwifery system work better? Because I think across the board, we all have consensus of where we want to go, which doesn't always happen, but the question is, how? And are there learnings from other provinces in particular that you think we could apply here fairly easily to make the system work better for people here in this province?
Ms. MacDonald.
Yeah, so I definitely think that the feasibility study, I'm happy to see that that's underway right now to look at a midwifery education program, because that is a key piece when we're talking about recruitment and retention of midwives. But I think we also need to kind of expand that a little bit. We just saw that Newfoundland announced that they have a pretty substantial incentive for midwives to come to Newfoundland to work. And a lot of the recruitment and retention incentives that we've seen offered in Nova Scotia have been only applied to nurses or family physicians, and so seeing that kind of offered to midwives to recruit midwives to those positions that are currently open. Of the positions that are open, I mentioned that there are maternity leaves. In the last couple of years, the midwives that have been hired were actually to permanent positions and not temporary positions, and that's why it's really hard for us to recruit people to the positions that are currently vacant, because midwives that are working right now in another province that qualify for those jobs have a caseload of clients that they're taking care of in those provinces. So, and they have, you know, a life probably settled down in that area that they need to uproot to move back to Nova Scotia to work in those positions. So it's not something that is kind of reasonable to ask someone to come for maybe a 9-month term. But if we could promise that those positions would have continued work beyond the temporary positions as they're currently posted, then I really do think that we would have midwives be more keen to join us here in Nova Scotia.
Emily Clark with a minute 30.
30? That question might be unfair to ask in a minute 30. Ms. Penney, I just quickly, no, this is not the unfair one. I wouldn't say that. But what's the overall budget for the midwifery program within Department of Health?
Ms. Penney?
I'd have to get that for you. I'm sorry, I didn't bring that with me today. It's not going to take me a minute 30 to answer that.
No.
Emily Clark.
And the figure, I know you don't have the specific figure handy at the moment, but has it been the same for the last number of years, or what's the growth or lack of growth been on that in recent years?
Ms. Penney?
So I'm going off the top of my head, but I do know that there was no change from 21 to 22, but we did add 4 permanent positions in 2019, so there was a significant increase in the budget in 2019 for sure. I would also say too that we learned from MLA McGuire's question earlier that to the point of temporary positions, that the IWK actually posted their position permanently. They flipped it from temporary to permanent to try and attract somebody. So when you talked to me about incentives, that was one of the things that came back. And so.
Order. I will now pass it to the NDP Caucus. MLA Libble.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to get some clarification on the feasibility study for the Training Institute. So there is a feasibility study going on right now, but it's being led by Newfoundland. Is that correct? Okay. Sorry.
Ms. Penney.
You'd think even over COVID, right, everybody would get used to like mics and being on mute and unmute. Yes, there's a feasibility study. It is involving all 4 Atlantic provinces, but Newfoundland is taking the lead, not necessarily on the content, but just on the logistics of it. Does that help? Yeah.
Emily LeBlanc.
Okay, great. Because we had FOIs that showed that we in Nova Scotia were on our way to commissioning the feasibility study, but then at the last minute, the Deputy Minister canceled it. So I was just curious to know why we're not taking the lead as, well, I mean, listen, people from Newfoundland might debate this, but I would say that, you know, HRM is the center of Eastern Canada in terms of, you know, our colleges and that kind of thing. So why are we not taking the lead in Nova Scotia?
Ms. Penney.
I'm going to have to take that back and ask that question. I wasn't with the Department of Health and Wellness during that time. I did see the FOIPOP. It was October 2022 that we agreed to it. And so I'll have to find out what the history behind that was. I don't know the answer.
Emily LeBlanc.
Thank you. Well, that would be great to get. So, Madam Chair, if the clerk can make a note of that, that would be great. So So I just wanted to ask Ms. MacDonald just a little, could you go into a little bit further? I mean, I love what you were saying about, women's health clinics or, people with uteruses health clinics. What would have to change? I think you said regulations, but what would have to change, and how long would it take for midwives in Nova Scotia to be able to, take on some of that work?
Ms. MacDonald.
So all of the standards of practice and regulations for midwives are determined by the Midwifery Regulatory Council of Nova Scotia, which is a professional body that's separate from the association. And that council would have to meet to kind of review any changes that would have to happen. Right now, it's just our scope is limited to the people that we've already had in care for that course of prenatal care, and so that would be the biggest amendment. Although we did discuss with the council a change to the regulations on providing newborn care for the unattached newborn clinic. That hasn't actually moved forward yet to provide care for newborns that don't have a family doctor by a month and a half, 2 months of age. But the council was very supportive in making those changes, and so I can't speak for them, but I would suspect that if we brought these concerns to the council, that they would be willing to hear them and consider changing some of our regulations to support that.
Emily LeBon.
Sorry, you're saying that the newborn clinic is not up and running yet? Because I know that during budget estimates, the minister spoke a lot about this and in the last session, and so I'm kind of shocked to hear that that's not up and running. So what is the delay there?
Ms. MacDonald?
We haven't heard back to see when that is going to be happening, but it isn't currently happening, the unattached newborn clinic. We have said that we're willing, specifically the IWK community midwives are willing to support that unattached newborn clinic, but it hasn't moved forward and happening yet.
Emily LeBlanc.
Maybe you could ask Ms. Cashen, is that something that you know about, or what the holdup is on that?
Ms. Cashen.
Sorry. The unattached newborn clinic, as Ms. MacDonald spoke to, is looking at feasibility of who and how we can get personnel to help out with that population. I did not come prepared with that data, but I can definitely get it.
Emily LeBlanc.
Great, and so, just put it out there, folks. Is it a question of money from the government? Is that what you're waiting on? Is it leadership from the government? What is actually holding it up? I don't understand. I understand the feasibility and all that stuff, but you're talking about support, who can do the work. Is it literally about that there's not enough midwives, or is it that is there something else going on that we just aren't getting here?
Ms. Cashen?
I think we are looking at HR kinds of support of the people to do the work more than anything else. So it's not only midwives that we've been looking at. We've been looking at nurse practitioners and nurses as well. So it's not an exclusive thing just for midwives. So we're looking at HR resources for all of that for the unattached newborns.
Emily LeBlanc?
How many minutes?
4, just under 4.
I'll pass it on to my colleague.
Emily Coombs.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about Unama'ki. So in Unama'ki, there are 5 First Nation communities, quite a few isolated communities. The only one that really has a hub is Member 2. And it has the highest, in Cape Breton, in Unama'ki, we have the highest rates of C-sections in the province, but there are no midwifery services, as we've discussed, on the island. And I know this as someone who has had children and would love to have even called up to get myself on a list, knew that I couldn't even do that. And so these services drastically reduce the number of C-sections, and it's one of the most common surgeries, and the health resources that go with them. And I know we discussed over here about stabilizing, but it really comes down to the fact that we need to actually do training, and we need to have that funding in place. And so with knowing this, why is midwifery not being used as a tool to provide the right care at the right time in Unama'ki and in the Valley? And why was this not properly looked at and funded over the last number of years, specifically since 2011 when there was a study done? If anyone would like to take it, Ms. Pictou.
We'll start with Ms. Peach, maybe, or?
Well, I'm not sure if I could answer that question. I think the question around expansion of midwifery for the province as a whole is really probably a question best directed to government and the health authorities. I think in terms of access to service for the Mi'kmaq communities in Unama'ki, as Karen has shared earlier, the engagement sessions that were done by Nova Scotia Native women certainly speak to the desire to see that service being available. Unama'ki is also home to one of the largest Mi'kmaq communities, Eskazoni, which does have a number of health services delivered there in community, midwifery obviously not being one of them. So I think from a Mi'kmaq community point of view, there's definitely interest. We've also identified in some of the research work that we've done that there is a key link between having an educational program and expanding and sustaining a service. And so we also understand that link and want to make sure that whatever education programs are developed are done in a way that includes an Indigenous perspective and worldview in that training. So, but in terms of overall general expansion, I don't know that I would be the best one to speak to that.
Did anyone have anything they wanted to add? Emily LeBlanc with 56 seconds.
Sorry, yes, quickly to Ms. Penney. My understanding is that you said you didn't, you weren't part of the decision making, but you were on those FOIPOP emails, in the email. So can you clarify what you meant by that?
Ms. Penney.
I just want to get the information.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll get you the information. I was working in the department, but wasn't kind of part of the conversations kind of earlier, was only part of the October 22 approval conversations. And so it was actually through that FOIPOP that I realized that there was a conversation that had happened where it may not have been approved. And so I'm just not party. I was party to the emails post-op, but not during.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry for the confusion.
14 seconds, Emily LeBlanc.
14 seconds left. I'll say I'm disappointed that the government has scheduled a press conference on a very important health issue during this very meeting when we're talking about a very important health issue. So it's a shame that we can't. Thank you.
I'll now pass it to the Progressive Conservative Caucus, Emily White.
Thank you, Chair. So my first couple of questions are to you, Ms. Peach, to the Tajikeimɨk. So delivering culturally competent health care is best achieved by representatives from the 13 Mi'kmaq nations. Can you offer some examples of ways in which this is being addressed through the organization and the positive impact it has on the communities? Thank you.
Ms. Peach.
Thanks for the question. So, you know, I think to start, we are very much in the early days as an organization, getting ourselves established. But there are already some early examples of where we've been able to do that a little bit differently. So there was some recent funding announced from the federal government focused around mental wellness. And we were able to come together with the 13 communities quite differently and with partner organizations, and Nova Scotia Native Women's being one of them, to prioritize how those funds would be best spent to meet the needs of communities. And so with that saw an investment and additional positions to support mental wellness and healing in all of the communities and 3 of our partner organizations as well. The other thing sort of related to this topic is support for the early years. So we have a collaborative project underway with the Martin Family Initiative that is developing and helped us develop a Mi'kmaq-specific early years program. And we now, with support of some funding from the province, have been able to do the first phase of implementation in 5 locations, so 4 communities and Nova Scotia Native Women's Centre. The Friendship Centre. And that has really been an opportunity to see that program very specific to the cultural and traditional perspectives of the Mi'kmaq rolled out in communities. So 2 examples that I'd highlight, one really close to this topic.
Emily White.
Thank you. Would that be in reference to the announcement of 28,000 that was done in February? That was for it was to help recruit Indigenous healthcare workers. So is that tied into there?
No,
Ms. Peach. Ms. Peach?
Thank you. No, I can speak to that one as well. There was also an investment through the provincial nursing strategy to support some of our Onlu nursing strategy work. So the $20,000, I think Ms. Penney referred to that a little bit earlier. That's to support some of the urgent needs of nursing students that are in the various nursing programs, Mi'kmaq nursing students in those programs to support them as they obtain their degree.
MLA White?
So, Ms. Cashen may want to get in this one a bit. I'm just wondering if you can share a bit about the partnership between Tajikeimɨk and IWK.
Who would like to start? Or I'll let Ms. Peach go first, and then Ms. Cashen after.
Thanks for that. So we've been, over the last number of years, as part of our development work, have been working very closely with provincial health system partners, so all of the relevant government departments connected to health, but also the two other provincial health authorities, so both the IWK as well as Nova Scotia Health. We're part of a strategic health partnership committee together, so including senior representatives of those two health authorities as well as provincial government departments. Over the last year, our focus has been on learning and sharing information about what services look like in communities and identifying areas for work together. So we work quite closely with both of those organizations on a number of different initiatives.
Ms. Cashen.
As well, part of our key performance indicators that the IWK produces each year, one of our goals is really strengthening the community ties with Tajikeimɨk and our Indigenous partners. And so there has been an engagement report that's not finalized yet, so it's still going back to the community to be verified, but that too, we did a lot of listening to hear how we have to change things within IWK Health, and so after that's verified, then we will also produce some actions to go along with that and what we heard.
MLA White?
I believe this question would be to Ms. MacDonald. Can you tell us a bit about priority populations and trends that you've seen for those who require midwifery services?
Ms. MacDonald?
So there is a mandate from the province to prioritize specific populations, and because we have such a large wait list, to try to make sure that we're accommodating those populations first before accommodating other candidates for midwifery care. And so those populations include Indigenous people, African Nova Scotians, people that have a history of mental health concerns, previous experiences or traumatic experiences with birth, labor, or any history of domestic or sexual assault. There's a list of about 15 priority populations. I don't have them in front of me, but that we try to prioritize when we're accepting clients into care, with the caveat that we do have that geographical limitation of who we can accept into care for each site. Based on where they're living and where they're planning to give birth.
MLA White?
What about the follow-up care that consists? Can you give us a little more on the follow-up care? I know you mentioned that 6 weeks postpartum, right? So can you give us a little more about what that includes? Because this is kind of new to me. I'm Glace Bay. We don't have access to it apparently. So.
Ms. MacDonald?
Absolutely. So midwives continue to be the primary care provider for both the parent and the newborn in that first 6 weeks of the newborn's life and the first 6 weeks postpartum. That typically includes visits in the first week at home that would be every 2 to 3 days, ideally, kind of seeing people at discharge from hospital or on the first day after they've had a home birth, seeing people again on day 3, day 5, and somewhere between day 7 to 10 postpartum, and then again at 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and 6 weeks. So usually at least 6 visits in that first 6 weeks of care, and those care assessments involve, vital assessments for both mother and baby, and also assessment of how things are healing, how feeding is going, that baby is gaining weight with whatever feeding plan is underway. So we bring a scale with us and weigh the baby and make sure that that baby is doing well, and both the family and the newborn are thriving.
MLA White?
Thank you. Ms. Penney, I guess, the Department of Health and Wellness. So government has implemented a couple of different initiatives to protect and revitalize Mi'kmaq languages and culture. Can you tell us a bit about the impacts and sorts of initiatives have had on efforts towards reconciliation?
Ms. Penney, with 146. Ms.
Sorry, were you talking to me? Oh, okay. I thought you just said, okay. Thank you very much for the question. It's been absolutely crucial to ensuring that the Mi'kmaq people of Nova Scotia, experience culturally safe and competent spaces and culturally safe and competent care. I would say the MOU with Tajikeimɨk in the last month has been probably the most significant piece of work that my team will be digging into with Lindsay's team from a clinical health services planning perspective, and making sure that we have the right services in the right areas, particularly in those places who are underserved and underprivileged.
Thank you. Emily Waite, you have 51 seconds.
51 seconds? I'll give this to Ms. Peach, and maybe you can share us a little bit more about the structure of Tajikeimɨk, since you didn't have much chance to say that.
Ms. Peach.
In 51 seconds, maybe not. So we are still evolving as an organization. So some of the structural questions are work left to do. So our structure currently, we're guided by the 13 Mi'kmaq chiefs, the health directors, and Grand Council is guiding our work. Part of the work over the next year is to define our governance model for what that will look like as an organization. Our structure right now as a team, we're quite small, but are growing. And that will be further defined as we identify over the next year what federal programs and services will transfer to our responsibility. So what it looks like now is not what it will look like 5 years from now.
Order. Sorry, the time for questioning has elapsed. I would invite, we do have a little bit of committee business, but I would invite brief closing remarks if you had any. I would begin with Ms. Pictou.
Thank you very much. Thank you for bringing us here to discuss this today. In closing, I think the main thing that I want to say is that although we're talking about increasing access for all of Nova Scotians, it's giving us our inherent right to be able to give birth within our communities in safe spaces that are culturally relevant, and not fear whether or not our children will be apprehended the moment that we give birth. That is a right of every other Nova Scotian here, but bringing midwifery to Mi'kmaq communities is going to be that act of reconciliation that genuinely changes lives and transforms our ability to access a healthcare system that is designed by us for us.
Thank you. Ms. Peach.
Thank you again for the invitation today. I think it's important to share, it didn't really come up, the misconception that health services for Indigenous peoples is a federal responsibility. That's not true. It is a shared responsibility. And as Karen said, access to culturally safe care. Access to midwifery is about more than the midwifery service. It's about restoring tradition and culture. It's an act of reconciliation. And I would say discussion around expansion of midwifery service in Nova Scotia can't be done without including the Mi'kmaq communities in that conversation. They're the fastest growing population. It's required for cultural safety, and it is an act of reconciliation. So thank you for including us in this conversation.
Thank you. Ms. MacDonald.
Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. I really do appreciate the discussion, and I think at the end of the day, I hope by everything that's been said that you can all agree that we need more midwives in this province. And it's recommended by the World Health Organization that midwives provide, a reduction in maternal and neonatal mortality rates. So the evidence is there. I hope that today, you all learned something about midwifery and that we can move forward in finding something that's going to work for Nova Scotian families.
Thank you. Ms. Penney.
Hi. Like Ms. Peach, there was a couple of things for me that didn't come up today, but I would really like to talk about, just for 10 seconds, the expansion of primary health care services around the province. That includes pregnant and newborn care and doing some really exciting things with pharmacy walk-ins and mobile pharmacy clinics. It's exceptionally important that we make sure that we actually get our Mi'kmaq population in those pieces of work, and I think that primary health care has done a really good job in that space. That being said, there's a lot more work to do, and I really look forward actually to working with Ms. Pictou, Ms. Peach, Ms. MacDonald, and Ms. Cashen moving forward in this maternal newborn space.
Thank you. And Ms. Cashen.
Thank you so much for the invitation today. Hopefully, what you heard is a dedication and a willingness to look at supporting midwifery within Mi'kmaq and making sure that needs are met. We are continued to support and dedicated to patient experience at IWK Health and look forward to working together with everybody on this panel to improve things.
Thank you. And on behalf of the committee, again, thank you all for being here and to having this important conversation today. We do have some committee business we're going to jump right into, but you're free to leave. Thank you. MLA McGuire.
We're getting a bit short on time. We only have 5 minutes. There's a bunch of issues to deal with. I'm just wondering if we could extend for 10 minutes with consent. I mean, come on, 10 minutes. If we can extend for 10 minutes and not have everyone run over to Rudy's afterwards, but if we could extend for 10 minutes so that we can deal with some very important issues here. I'd like to put a motion on the floor to extend for 10 minutes. Yes.
MLA White.
I am sincerely sorry, but I cannot extend this meeting. I have another one here at 1 o'clock with natural resources. I know it is 12 o'clock, and I would like to eat today sometime. Thank you. I can't. Not going to happen. Thank you.
Make your motion, Brendan.
The motion's on the floor.
Oh, sorry.
Do you need a motion?
I don't have to make a motion, but he's made a motion, so you have to.
Okay. Okay. All in favor of extending the meeting?
Aye.
And those opposed? Nay. So we will move into committee business. Oops. Or, sorry, the motion was defeated. Sorry. Thank you. We will move into the committee business on the agenda, and it was correspondence. Ms. Stephanie McGinnis-Langley has retired from the Nova Scotia Advisory Board on the Status of Women, and the Department of Community Services informed the clerk that they would bring an appropriate staff member to the meeting. I just want to know if anyone had any questions or discussions on that correspondence that was circulated. Saying nothing. MLA McGuire.
I have a motion, and I'll read it quickly so everyone can vote. I put a motion on the floor that we hold an emergency meeting of community services on the impact the EPA strike is having on the health and welfare of single parents, community service clients, and all parents in HRM. This meeting will be held next week, with the witnesses being Deputy of Education Elwin LaRue, Steve Gallagher from HRCE, Inclusion Nova Scotia Deputy Minister of Community Services, and representatives from the IWK. The impact the strike is having on our most vulnerable is potentially life-altering, and it's time to work together now to find a fair deal and get those children back in school.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
Do you want to give us a minute to discuss it?
We will take a 2-minute recess.
2 minutes.
Oops, my apologies. We will not take a, we will take a 30-second recess.
We take a minute.
30 seconds, she said.
We're going to take a 1-minute recess. Order. The meeting on Standing Committee of Community Services is back in order. MLA White.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, that motion needs more conversation than 30 seconds. And you obviously had that motion planned well before this meeting. You just wrote it? Well, that's a motion that we should have had at least ahead of time. So I'm prepared. We're not supporting that motion. Thank you.
Call the question.
We will be voting all those in favor. We will be doing a recorded vote. I hand it over to the clerk.
Mr. White?
No.
Mr. Harrison?
No.
Ms. Barkhouse?
No.
Mr. Ritchie?
No.
Ms. LeBlanc?
Yes.
Ms. Coombs?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. McGuire?
Yes.
Ms. Sheehy Richard?
No. The motion is defeated. Emily LeBlanc?
Thank you. I just wanted to make a quick motion, based on what we heard in today's meeting, to write a letter to, as the committee, to write a letter to the Department of Health and Wellness to get an update on what's happening with unattached newborn clinics.
All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Emily LeBlanc, can you reread the motion?
I think the committee, based on what we heard today, should write a letter to the Department of Health and Wellness asking for an update on the implementation of newborn health clinics.
All those in favor of the motion that's on the floor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay?
Nay.
Motion is passed.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will be,
30 seconds. That's fine. 22 seconds.
Emily LeBlanc, or McGuire.
I motion that we send in a request to the Department of Health and Premier's Office requesting a funding increase in the midwifery program to allow for equal access to midwifery all over the province.
All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Those opposed? Nay. The next meeting will be, or the motion has been defeated. The next meeting will be on June 6, 2023. Update on standing together to prevent domestic violence. The witnesses would be Department of Community Service and Nova Scotia Advisory Board on the status of women. The meeting is adjourned.